Welcome back. With just a few days to the January 31st, 2023 deadline fixed by the Central Bank of Nigeria for the withdrawal of the old 200, 500 and 1,000 Naira banknotes from circulation, it is expected that bank customers would utilize the remaining days to comply with the directive. But citizens are worried over the scarcity of the new notes, especially at banks' automated teller machine ATM points. Many Nigerians are still yet to physically see or transact business with the notes. Just recently, the CBN had ordered banks to suspend dispensing the new currency notes over the counter and to only make them available via the ATMs. While speaking at a training session for state directors of the National Orientation Agency in Abuja, the Director Currency Operations Department of the CBN, Ahmed Umar, warned the banks that fail to comply with its directive to dispense the newly redesigned notes through their ATMs will be penalized. Umar explained that the purpose of the CBN directive was to implement the January 31st deadline for the withdrawal of old Naira notes in circulation, but latest checks at ATMs across Nigeria indicate that the old notes are still being dispensed. In light of these problems, is the deadline set for the withdrawal of old currencies realistic? Well, joining me on the program is Chukuma Okenwa, CEO, Lead Network, and Economist. He joins us from Enugu. Thank you so much for joining me on the program. Now, it's quite a lot to unwrap. While we're still trying to internalize the redesign of the new Naira notes, the CBN comes up with other policies. Now, how do you think these policies come to being announced? What would you say were the considerations put in place?
In all honesty, I think one of the things economic analysts will agree is that CBN as a policymaker did not factor in the place of inclusion in this policy and in the mannerism with which it intends to implement the policy. Now, what do I mean by that? Out of 200 million Nigerians, how many citizens are really the banked Nigerians? As at the last time I checked, the number of banked Nigerians is somewhere around just about 20%, less than 20% of Nigerians have bank accounts. Yes, we know that the Cbn has been advocating for cashless policy, but we know it is a process. But what I really find quite challenging in all the back and forth between the CBN and the banks is a situation where CBN is saying, well, we have well enough, but then on the field, and of course, via the banks, the financial institutions that interface directly with the citizens, you see that those new currencies are quite scarce. And I want to agree with the experience of Nigerians that perhaps there may not be enough consequent on one valid point. The very fact that all of a sudden CBN comes up and say, well, don't dispense this over the counter. Now you are going to do it all entirely through, the ATM machines. Really makes some of us to want to wonder, are this money really sufficient? Because if it is sufficient, why want to limit the chances of accessing it just only via the ATM when it is something you are newly introducing and you want it to spread across the length and breadth of Nigeria as fast as possible?
Now, the CBN would you say the CBN is right in its decision to penalize banks, that don't load their ATMs with the new Naira notes, given that the currencies are still scarce?
I mean, in all sincerity, we saw this play out even in the issue of the Forex regime as regards to the implementation of the online Form A as a way to streamline the access to dollars and to ensure that those that need it for legitimate purposes get that. And initially, when CBN came with the policies and given a lot of good reasons, that the reason why you have to complete the form online is to ensure that it gets to the bet hands. But at the end of the day, it became very clear that there were not enough of dollars and to actually transmit to the banks to give to their customers. that may be required to pay school fees, or even like the PTA, we saw like lots of delays. So some of the things that you see across the banks is a reflection of what is happening at the center, and CBN will not have any moral rights to penalize the banks. Because get what? These banks have their different boards, they have their different management. So how come it seems that even though the policies may differ a little bit, the core values may differ a little bit, how come all of them are having a similar experience at this particular point? What that may suggest is that the CBN, whose responsibility at this point is to ensure that the funds is sufficient to the banks, and then from the banks to the people, it's probably not having all of the monies to dispense at this particular point. That is quite suggestive of that.
There have been reports that the new currencies are being rejected, especially by market women and, other categories of Nigerians at the grassroots. And analysts have urged the CBN to increase awareness. Now, what are your thoughts on this?
In all honesty, I think, it's really very interesting when policymakers seem not to really understand the uniqueness of the nation we find ourselves. Now, out of the 774 local governments, how many of the local governments are really urban? And then when you consider that, juxtapose that with the numbers that are entirely and typical rural areas, then you discover that when you want to make some policies and want to assume that there is much digital penetration already, everybody is on the internet, everybody can access information as much as possible, you must consider those persons that are there. And because they were not included in the policy framework and the design, they have every right to express their doubts. Because just all of a sudden, and for previous years, you've been transacting in a certain color of the currency, and all of a sudden somebody comes in from the city and then brings something that the only difference is in the color. You have such doubts and you're wondering, are you really sure this is authentic? Would this not be a way that some persons who are educated or who feel they are coming from the city would be shortchanging a portraiter like myself in the village? And they have those doubts, and they should have, because nobody really went beyond maybe the usual conventional ways of transmission of information to actually get to the grassroots, to educate the real stakeholders, the traders, those that are dealing with this money, is that indeed there is a new sheriff in town, that it is no longer business as usual. So I think this would have been substantially done even ahead of giving up the deadlines. But of course, it's interesting to know that as a country, we're already accustomed with the fire brigade approach.
Now, the maximum over-the-counter cash withdrawal for individuals is 100,000 naira for, and then, 500,000 naira for corporate bodies. And, going above this attracts processing fees of 5% and 10%. Now, would you say this is a good policy if it controls illicit financial flows in the country?
In all honesty, jamming all of these things together at this particular point wouldn't be a good one. Yes, in terms of the charges or some values of withdrawals, we know that the proposition was not first made today. With the recent years where we see the CBN advocating for cashless policies, we saw some of those projections, which, if you ask me, it's also a good one, because the more cashless an economy goes, the more flexible it becomes, right? So you don't have to maybe queue up all of the time in the bank. There's also a reduction of the incidence of money laundering, carrying money in large quantities. So I can't agree with the CBN on that. But I have an issue with the very fact that at this point, what is reasonably expected is that if you are a trader doing business somewhere, right, and you have some old currencies and you want to exchange it for the new one. So I have an issue with the fact that we are trying to compile all of these things. If we are doing cashless policy, we do cashless policy per time. If we are changing the currency, we do that. There should be that focus, because trying to get all of these things at the same time and with a limited deadline, it could be counterproductive.
Well, all right now, Chukwuma Okenwa, CEO, Lead Network and Economist, thank you for your time and your contribution.
Thank you.
Well, that's how much we can take on this edition of the program. Thank you for watching. I am Mary Kanu. Bye for now.